Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Tuesday. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. You know, we're hearing that the Republican senators are blindsided, shocked, amazed, horrified, and not believing the revelations in John Bolton's book. Well, even the word revelations is weird usage, because what Bolton's book says is what virtually every single witness who testified before the House said, which is Trump was running this extortion bribery racket against Ukraine and against Zelensky, and they had done it with the previous president as well. In fact, the whole thing blew up. I believe the previous president's name was Poroshenko. The whole thing blew up when the deal that they had cut with the previous president, who was supportive of the corrupt prosecutor that Joe Biden got fired, who was not looking into Burisma at the time, but nonetheless, we'll get into that. But they had cut the deal with this guy, and then Zelensky wins the election. And now they've got to come up with a whole new way, because now we've got an actual anti-corruption crusader as prime minister, or as president, of Ukraine. And so, you know, when these guys say that, oh, we're amazed by this, you know, we were not expecting this, we're, you know, shocked. They're excuse me, I had to sneeze there. They are not shocked by what's in the book. They're shocked that they haven't been able to pull off the cover-up faster. You know, they're trying to get this thing done before Tuesday, because Tuesday is the State of the Union address. And Trump wants to get up there in the State of the Union address, and we now know that he will politicize anything, right? He stands in front of the wall at the CIA with the stars with no names of the CIA officers and agents who have died in the field, you know, in service to their country, but their names can't be revealed because it's still a secret. He stands in front of that wall at an anniversary, as I recall. I forget the exact circumstances, but an anniversary of the death of one of these people, something that has to do with it was a solemn occasion. He stands in front of that wall and goes off on a riff about how the Democrats don't like America. He politicizes everything. So, I mean, he talks to the troops. You're not supposed to talk politics to the military. It's against the law to begin with, and it's certainly against military policy, but Trump does it. He goes and he talks to the troops and he trashes Democrats. And the so-called Democrat Party, which I don't know what country that exists in. Here in the United States, it's called the Democratic Party. But in any case, so, you know, what Trump wants to do on Tuesday in his State of the Union address is he wants to get up and say, well, the Democrats tried their best. They took their shot and they missed. And, you know, if you're going to take on the king, you better kill the king, is the old metaphor from, I believe, from Shakespeare. And you know, he's basically going to say they didn't kill me politically. And so now, I, Claudius, now we have an actual dictatorship. I will become the new dictator. I no longer have to worry about what Congress is going to do. I can't be held accountable by the Justice Department or any state prosecutor, because As president, I can't be indicted, I can't be charged, I can't be arrested, and he's saying he can't even be investigated. And yes, his attorneys actually argued before the Supreme Court, no, actually it was before a circuit court, that if Donald Trump had killed somebody while in office, that the investigation would have to wait until after he was no longer president, which he's trying to make sure is going to be 5 years from now. For the obvious reason, he wants to stay out of jail, among other things. So what happened yesterday? Well, actually, what's happening today, there's some real scurrying around going on because of John Bolton's book. John Bolton's book, of course, says that Bolton actually heard Trump. I mean, Trump actually said this to him, that, you know, the $391 million in security assistance for Ukraine was being held until Ukraine turns over documents relating to Biden's and Democrats, and there were actually other Democrats, I guess, and proof that it wasn't Russia who hacked the DNC, it was Ukraine. And the reason that Bolton's book is a problem is if you look at the legal brief that the Republicans, the Republican lawyers in this trial before the Senate submitted to the Senate just last week. The brief, item 4 in their brief, the headline is, House Democrats rely solely on speculation built on hearsay. Now, hearsay is one step away from, you know, first-person testimony. In other words, if somebody actually hears the president say, I want Zelensky to investigate Biden and I'm going to hold up the money until he does. Somebody actually hears him say that, that's first-person witness testimony. Now, Sondland came close to that, but as the Republican lawyers yesterday argued repeatedly, Sondland said, that was my speculation, that was my conclusion, that was the obvious conclusion. He couched his assertions with these kind of weasel words. So everybody who has testified about this, they testify about how it happened, where it happened, when it happened, who was involved with it, but actually hearing Donald Trump, like, you know, stand up on the Resolute desk or mount a podium somewhere and do you know, like the bad guys from a Superman or a Batman movie, you know, the evil guy. I, Dr. Evil, have put this plan together because it's going to take down my opponents and for all time. You know, nobody has said they actually heard Trump say that yet, until Bolton. So item 4 of the legal brief that was submitted says, quote, not a single witness with actual knowledge ever testified that the president suggested any connection between announcing investigations and security assistance. I think the question that all this raises is, will Trump get away with all this? And if so, and this is the real problem, and I'm going to get to, you know, what their new strategy is today in just a minute, but they've got a whole, they're doubling and tripling down on how to figure this out, how to have Bolton taken care of, right? How to get this problem of Bolton's book out of the way. And they actually have a strategy for this. But first I just want to finish this kind of thought here. Back, and this Judd Legum put these together in his newsletter today at popular.info, and it's just great. Senator John Cornyn, back on December 23rd, about 4 weeks ago, tweeted, no quid pro quo, therefore the Democratic grounds for ousting Trump are weak. Senator Ted Cruz, 2 weeks ago on Hannity, said, quid pro quo allegations are hearsay from, quote, people who have no direct evidence and witnesses who never even met President Trump. And that would be, you know, like, Ambassador Hill and like that. And Jim Inhofe, Republican from Oklahoma, He says the major problem with the case against Trump is not one of the witnesses was a first-hand witness. Well, Bolton is, see? And even a bunch of the Republicans in the House, Doug Collins tweeted, there's zero quid pro quo. That was in September. Mark Meadows told reporters, what we do know is that there's definitely no quid pro quo. Right? Again, they're all arguing, no first-person testimony. Jody Heiss of Georgia tweeted, no quid pro quo, no pressure. Congressman Jim Jordan tweeted, it's been very clear, no quid pro quo. So now Bolton comes out and says, yeah, there's a quid pro quo, and I was there, and I heard it from the president's own lips. So what does Trump say? Bolton's a liar. He tweeted yesterday, I never told John Bolton that the aid to Ukraine was tied to investigations into Democrats, including the Bidens. And then a few hours later, he tweeted again. He says, there's no way in the world. Excuse me, this is Giuliani a couple hours later. Tweets, there's no way in the world President Trump would say this to John Bolton. Right. Right. So what they're trying to do, actually, by accusing Bolton of being a liar, as Joe Leggum points out, these guys are actually making the case for Bolton's testimony. And that vote will probably come at the end of this week. It comes, what's happening right now is today is the summary day. The president's lawyers are summarizing their arguments. And then, assuming the day continues, they will go to questions. And they've got 16 hours where individual senators can submit questions, and the impeachment managers from the House, the Democrats in the House or the president's lawyers will answer those questions. And we don't know yet exactly how that's going to be moderated. Who decides what questions? There's obviously going to be a lot more questions than there is time to even ask them, much less answer them. And we're not sure who's filtering that. If I find out, I'll let you know. I haven't seen a good summary of that anywhere. And in fact, I saw on TV this morning, somebody had asked one of the senators that specific question. And the answer was, I don't know. Meanwhile, Mitch McConnell is trying to do this quick trial so that he can, as I said before, they want to get this wrapped up before February 4th so that Trump can, in his State of the Union address, claim that he won. And by the way, let me just note the consequences of Trump winning. If it is true that a president cannot be investigated, indicted, or prosecuted while he's in office, then the only way that a president can be held to account for crimes he commits while he's president is through impeachment. But if Trump is not impeached when there's clear evidence of crimes, in this case bribery and extortion, if Trump is not removed from, well, he's been impeached. If he's not removed from office, to be more precise with my language, then what that says is to every future president, don't worry, you have absolute power, as long as your party controls the Senate, or controls more than half of the Senate, or even controls enough of the Senate that you can prevent a 2/3 vote, because that's what it takes to remove somebody. You don't even have to actually control the Senate. All you have to do is control more than a third of it. And that means we've turned the presidency into a monarchy, into a dictatorship, essentially.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
That is not good for democracy. It's not good for America. That is flipping the entire idea of, three branches of government that are co-equal on its head. And welcome back. Let's see here. Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK. Morris, I suspect I'm going to agree with you. What are your thoughts today?
We want to hear from Stormy Daniels. We don't want to hear from Mr. Botan. No, ain't nobody reading no books no way. It'd be good for the rate. It'd be good for Stormy. I got some questions for Stormy. What did the president say to you while you was with him? And why did they call you?
If I may, what did the president say to you while you were spanking his bare bottom with a rolled-up copy of Fortune magazine with the president's picture on the cover with his daughter?
Now that's talk about some ratings, y'all.
Yeah.
And why do they call you Stormy? And do you recognize any members in our chamber All right. That's how you handle it. Talk to you later, Professor.
Okay, thank you, Morris. Good talking to you. Oh, one of our most insightful callers. And Stormy, tell us about mushrooms. No, maybe not. Maybe that's more than we want to know. Amazing. Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Everybody's all talking about Trump and getting away with this. Well, 8 weeks ago, I read a op-ed from the Attorney General of New York, and she said about the time Trump's receiving the Republican nomination for president, she should have enough evidence to arrest him and plans on arresting him.
You're talking about Letitia James?
For various crimes of money laundering and racketeering and a bunch of other. The state of New York actually has crimes against these. They're not federal crimes. They're actually state crimes.
Right.
He can't be insulated against state crimes. I really wish I wasn't suspended off Twitter. Twitter said I self-reported for hateful content and suspended me, and I repealed it. Otherwise, I'd be able to look the article up and tweet it to you. But
why don't you open another Twitter account? I mean, get a second email address. You can get them for free, and
that was I'm going to have to do that.
Yeah.
I have a lot of followers though, and I had 1,000 people tell me I was awesome in one day. That really made me feel good and humbled me all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, well, now that you know the rules, tread more carefully. Not that I would, not that I'm recommending anybody break Twitter's rules. I'm recommending that you, comply with them.
I tried.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Paul, I got to run, but good luck, and keep it up. William in Lithonia, Georgia. Hey, William, what's up?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I called last year and I asked you why should I vote for anybody because they got a D next to the name.
Right.
And I want to clarify what I was talking about. See, I'm in the tank for Bernie. Right? I want Bernie to be president, so I'm going to vote for him in the primary. And before anybody gets on their high horse talking a bunch of crap about, if you don't vote for Joe Biden and he's going to use voting for Trump. I live in Georgia. My vote, because of the electoral college, my vote for a Democrat in the general election is a waste of time anyway. Mm-hmm. But anyhow,
but Bernie has a chance. I mean, he's rising in the polls. They're starting to attack him like there's no tomorrow. That means they're worried.
Yeah, I know. I mean, before they get through with it, they're going to be saying that Bernie is like,
They're going to be saying he killed JFK.
Yeah,
I'm with you, William. I'm sorry, we're out of time, but give us a call again, and we can get into the conversation a little deeper. I was a little more up against the break there than I realized when I put you on. My apologies. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. So what are they going to do about Bolton? I kind of asked the question before, and my big question for you is, do you agree with me or disagree with me that if Trump is not removed from office, he has already been impeached, obviously, but if he's, and when I say if he's not impeached, you know what I mean, but I do need to be more precise in my language. If he is not removed from office, does that redefine the presidency for all time? I mean, we all looked at the Clinton impeachment and we said, really, for a BJ, you're kidding? And, nobody really worried about the state of the presidency if Clinton wasn't removed from office. In fact, if Clinton had been removed from office, I think we'd all be worried about the state of the Senate. Really? You're going to take a president down for that? For lying to his wife and the country about having an affair? I mean, didn't LBJ do that? Didn't Eisenhower do that? Didn't FDR do that? Didn't Kennedy do that? They didn't lie under oath to a grand jury, but the effect is the same. So we didn't take that seriously, but this is serious stuff. This is an actual crime. This is the first time a president has been impeached for something that involves foreign policy and national security. So how are they going to handle this? Well, they've got two strategies right now that Mitch McConnell appears to be weighing. And the first is, okay, we'll have a witness swap of some kind. You Democrats agree to let Joe Biden come testify, and we will agree to let John Bolton testify. And frankly, I think that's a deal that the Democrats should take. I think if Joe Biden has nothing to hide, and I believe he doesn't, I believe that Joe Biden, this is his adult kid. Hunter Biden has a horrible and sketchy past. He lived in a homeless camp in L.A. for a couple of weeks, snorting cocaine every day. He's gone through multiple wives. He just last week in D.C. Reached a settlement with a stripper that he impregnated for child support. I mean, this guy's got problems. But he's an adult. And if Biden's policy with his adult kids was hands off, then, God bless him. This could be the thing that makes Joe Biden president. If he gets up there and he does like Robert, I believe it was Robert Welsh did with Joe McCarthy, and some senator or a lawyer for the president questions him about his son, and he just turns to them and says, "Have you no shame at long last, sir?" I mean, that's all it's going to take. Right? All he has to do is call these guys out. Really, Mr. Sekulow? Are you trying to hold me to account for my son's behavior? That could make him president. That could catapult him to the top of the Democratic primary. So that's one thing. And now Lindsey Graham has a different idea. Lindsey Graham says, let's not quite subpoena Bolton. Let's subpoena his book. And we'll put it in a skiff, a secure compartmented facility. We will put it in a skiff and in lockdown, and all of the senators can go in and read Joe Biden's book if they want. John Bolton's book if they want to. And then we can go out and we can say to our voters, especially, Tom Tillis and Cory Gardner and Jody Ernst, we can say to our voters, yes, we evaluated the evidence. We'll see.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And in fact, James Lankford has already kind of signed off on this. He was the one who actually suggested it. Lindsey Graham is now pushing it up the flagpole. We'll see. Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In Part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And Part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters Series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Breaking news. John Kelly, the former chief of staff to Donald Trump, the guy who famously said, yeah, we need to really punish these immigrants and their children in a way that hurts them so that other refugees, I said immigrants, I should say refugees, so that other refugees won't think that they can come to the United States. So it'll stop them from coming. This insanely cruel man who's now on the board of directors of a private prison that houses refugees. John Kelly was in Florida, Sarasota, Florida yesterday, and giving a talk. It was at the Ringling College Library Association, their town hall lecture. And Kelly said, and I quote, "If John Bolton says that," in other words, that Trump was doing a quid pro quo, "I believe John Bolton. Every single time I was with Bolton, he always gave the president the unvarnished truth. The majority of Americans would like to hear the whole story. I think some of the conversations seemed to me to be very inappropriate, but I wasn't there." Keep in mind, this all happened after Mick Mulvaney became chief of staff. He says, "But I wasn't there, but there were people who were there who ought to be heard from." That, of course, would be Mr. Bolton. Now, meanwhile, one of the other things that is in Bolton's book that has everybody flipped out, including me, is that John Bolton went to Bill Barr, the Attorney General, and said, "I am really concerned that Donald Trump is sucking up to the president of China, Xi Jinping, and that he's sucking up to the president of Turkey, Erdogan." Now, why might he do this? Well, there's a couple things that you need to consider. With regard to China, Robert Reich notes all this nepotism talk, in other words, Biden and his son. Oh my God, it's nepotism. And I'm going to get into, what how the House or how the Trump lawyers, what they did yesterday real quickly. But Reich says all this talk of nepotism reminds me of one company that was spared from Trump's heavy tariffs on China. What was the one company that was specifically excluded from the tariffs? Ivanka Trump's clothing company. Robert Reich tweets, "Right after a $34 billion round of tariffs in 2018, Ivanka's company put in another order for 140,000 pairs of shoes from a Chinese factory." So I think it's becoming fairly obvious why Donald Trump is trying to suck up to Xi. Why would he want to suck up to Erdogan, the president of Turkey? Could it have something to do with 2 Trump Towers in Turkey that Erdogan has threatened to take Trump's name off of? And yes, he has. Keep in mind, it was Erdogan who called Trump up one day and said, "Hey, pull your damn troops out of Syria. Me and the Russians are going in." And Trump said, "Sir, yes, sir." And he did it and stabbed the Kurds in the back. And probably tens of thousands of people have died as a result of that decision. And the chaos is ongoing. So weirdly, John Bolton, he loves bombing people and having wars, but apparently there's some shred of coherence to Bolton's political and foreign policy philosophy. Bolton says that he's concerned that these two guys are exerting what he called, quote, undue influence, that's the word from his book, on Trump. So in response to Bolton's unpublished book, the Department of Justice trotted out their spokesperson this morning, Carrie Kupek, who said, and I quote, "There was no discussion of personal favors or undue influence on investigations, nor did Attorney General Barr state that the president's conversations with foreign leaders was improper." Right, like we believe things that Bill Barr says after he lied to us about the Mueller report, after he deep-sixed the Iran-Contra investigation when he was, running the Department of Justice for George Herbert Walker Bush. Mr. Cover-Up General, as William Safire used to call him. Right. So just a quick recap of what happened yesterday. The day started out with Cipollone basically saying that you're not going to see anything, you're not going to hear anything, the House has not presented any evidence that suggests that this car going down this road, this quid pro quo, this extortion bribery deal, that Donald Trump's hands were on the wheel of that car. You're not going to find any of that. To use a metaphor that Mark Sumner used over at Daily Kos. It's a good one. And Trump never, Mark Sumner says, Trump has never stood on top of the Resolute desk to deliver a Lex Luthor-style monologue. That was essentially what Pat Cipollone said yesterday. That was the in the morning, while or the first half of the day, while this show was on the air. And then that was followed by, during the break, Fox News, well, actually, not just the break, last night, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, a whole bunch of them, last night on Fox News, they all attacked John Bolton. Oh, he was never really a Republican. Oh, he's in with the Democrat Party. There is no such thing as a Democrat Party, but, I don't know. Maybe there is in Hungary or something, but not here. But in any case, they'll say that. Oh, they did say that yesterday. And in their final argument, and several of them made this argument, well, John Bolton's really a deep state operative, and he knows James Comey. So then the middle part of the day was this smear of Joe Biden. And the person in charge of that was the former Attorney General of Florida, whose office was investigating Trump University for fraud in Florida. And Donald Trump had his foundation illegally write her a $25,000 campaign check because she was up for re-election as Attorney General. And suddenly she dropped the investigation. This is Pam Bondi. And so Pam Bondi got up and she said, well, what actually happened was that Joe Biden tried to get rid of this prosecutor because the prosecutor was investigating Burisma and Joe Biden's son, who was on the board of Burisma. And all the evidence we've seen so far indicates that one of the reasons why the United States and the European Union and the International Monetary Fund wanted to get rid of the prosecutor, Lutsenko, was because he was refusing to investigate Burisma. And then finally, the last part of the day, and again, this is why I think, Joe Biden should leap at an opportunity to testify in the impeachment hearings. It'll turn him into a red-hot superstar if he does a good job. And then finally, of course, last night in prime time, Alan Dershowitz, no harm, no foul was his phrase. This is the guy who defended Klaus von Bülow and O.J. Simpson and has worked with Brett Kavanaugh. Brett Kavanaugh, by the way, this from the New York Times by Alan Liptick in 2018, as Kavanaugh's hearings, the hearings were going on. He wrote for the New York Times, Brett Kavanaugh urged prosecutors investigating President Bill Clinton to question him, Clinton, in graphic detail about his sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky. This is according to a memo that was released by the National Archives in August of 2018. Kavanaugh spent more than 3 years working for Ken Starr, and he worked on the report that was all filled with porno. It was Kavanaugh who drew up the memo recommending that they do it this way. And I got a bunch of Kavanaugh quotes here. But anyhow, you know, it's like the old gang is getting back together. So Pam Bondi goes after Joe Biden. And what does Joni Ernst say during the break after Pam Bondi's going after Joe Biden with what is, according to the Biden camp, an absolute lie? Joni Ernst, who's up for re-election in Iowa, the Republican senator from Iowa, comes out and says, I'm really interested to see how, and, basically Joni Ernst's performance, quote, informs and influences the Iowa caucus voters, those Democratic caucus goers. She actually used the correct name of the party. Shocked. Now, McConnell and all these other guys are going, this is not political. We're not trying, this is... And then Barrasso comes out and says essentially the same thing. He says, I was watching Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Michael Bennet and Amy Klobuchar, and they were really eyes wide open during that part of it. Like, oh my God, the Democrats are realizing that Joe Biden's corrupt too. Which, at the end of the day, I mean, the bottom line, Chris Murphy said it best, the Democratic senator from Connecticut. He said, Trump is trying to use the trial to do what Ukraine refused to do, destroy his political rival, that is specifically Joe Biden. So is it going to work? Where does this take us? What does this mean for the future of America? By the way, in our second hour, we're going to get into the Wuhan virus and some things you may not have thought about with regard to this, and some thoughts I have with regard to this and how it might impact a whole bunch of different things, including the economy. And in our third hour, we've got Stephen Smith, America's new Redneck Rebellion, and, hang on.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The professor of law here in Oregon who put together this climate lawsuit with these young people and how they're going to be fighting back. Stick around. And welcome back. Betty in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Hey, Betty, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
To be your mother, and I want to tell you, I would be proud to call you son.
Oh, well, thank you.
I also agree with you about Alan Dershowitz. What a poor lawyer he turned out to be when he decides to take the side of Trump. As a matter of fact, the Constitution will agree with you and me when they said they didn't stop at high crimes. They said misdemeanors, lowering the bar where these inept, incompetent, degenerate people become president of the United States. Get rid of them. Make it easy to get rid of them, not more difficult. We don't need people like that in the office of the presidency.
Right.
Don't look for a god sitting on a throne in Washington. Look for a competent, honest, decent man. And
or woman.
I think that Alan Dershowitz did a great disservice to truth and justice by what he preached last night on television. I
agree, and I think that most people are kind of blinded by his celebrity and forget that basically he's a hired gun for some of the creepiest people out there. Klaus von Bülow, who murdered his wife. O.J. Simpson. It's just he's a hired gun for bad guys. I mean, if anything, that should tell you that we shouldn't be listening to this. Betty, thank you for your kind words and thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. Kelly in Lake Havasu, Arizona. Hey, Kelly, what's up?
Hey, Professor. So last night I was running down this line of thinking about the Electoral College and how the small states with smaller populations have more pull than they kind of should have.
Yeah.
So that got me to thinking about, Reagan with changing the tax on sugar and how corn became high fructose corn syrup after that.
Right. This was an effort to move the the products that Americans use to sweeten their foods away from things that came from Caribbean and Central and South American countries and to domestic production, specifically corn growers in the Midwest. Yeah.
Right, but just in doing that, it wasn't about stopping the sugar. In my mind, what it was is part of the Republican long-term strategy. You put more power into a fewer hands.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, you're jacking the profits of the Midwestern states.
Exactly, and it's less population, but you're giving them a bigger say. So you've got 200 farmers that are pissed off about whatever, and all of a sudden they're beating 2 million in California with their electoral college votes.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the electoral college is the sum of the senators and members of the House, and so Wyoming has one member of the House, but they have 2 senators. So California has 2 senators. It's like, yeah. And this is one of those issues that eventually we're going to have to really face, because people are moving out of rural areas in America and into cities at record rates right now. And there are people suggesting that eventually, you're going to have roughly 20 states that have, in total, the population of New York. And that's crazy. That's 40 senators equal New York. And that's not as many as California. Kelly, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Stick around. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Well, so let's pick up your thoughts on these things. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
How do you do, Tom?
Good.
Is the quality of this call any better than the last one was, hopefully?
Marginally. It's okay. I can understand it.
Marginally. Oh, good. Okay. You were querying early whether we're sliding towards some kind of monarchical presidency. Certainly looks that way, and it's very discouraging, and it's got to be stopped somehow to reclaim whatever we have left of our democracy at this point. What I wanted to bring up with you was the article Charles Blow wrote yesterday. Did you see that in the Times?
I did not.
He addressed this situation of a probable acquittal by the Senate and how it could be the final nail in the coffin for all the people who are on the fence about whether to have any faith left in our government, when so many people have already lost faith in it, and we are at a very dangerous tipping point, perhaps, of far more people not trusting their government at all than have residual faith in it left. It was a very
well. I think you could argue the other side of that too. That it's going to frankly piss off so many Americans that the system has become so corrupt. I mean, I believe, Nicholas, that one of the reasons why Donald Trump got even within 3 million votes of Hillary Clinton and why he's in the White House right now is because people know that our political system, since the 80s, since these Supreme Court decisions making it legal for billionaires and corporations to own politicians, that our political system is broken, that it's corrupt. And Trump pointed that out and said he was going to fix it. He was going to drain the swamp. And a lot of people took him at his word and believed him and voted for him. And
that's my hope as well, that it could swing in the other direction, as you're now suggesting. But I'll tell you, Charles Blow laid out a very dispiriting argument as to why it might not happen quite that way.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to go back and look at it.
Checking out the article at any rate.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Nicholas, thanks for the heads up on that. And thanks for the call. Andrea in Hardyston, New Jersey. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, Hardyston.
Hi.
Hi, Tom. I have an obvious question. If the Republicans want Joe Biden so bad, why don't they just subpoena him? They have the votes.
That's an excellent point. And, that's what some of the Republicans are actually arguing to Mitch McConnell is, let's get Joe Biden in here. Others are saying, no, let's not. And I think the ones who are saying, let's not get Joe Biden in here, and it looks like probably the majority of the Republicans are saying, let's not get Joe Biden in here, is because, I believe, they are worried that Joe Biden, who is not the most eloquent speaker, but he's no dummy, Joe Biden may well do what I just suggested and pull a Robert Welch to Joe McCarthy, have you no shame at long last, sir, rant, and take them down.
Yeah.
And I think it's entirely possible. Andrea, excellent point. Thank you very much for that. Jeff in Grants Pass, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
I haven't talked to you in quite a while, so welcome back to Oregon.
Thank you.
Hey, I just got 2 quick points. One, I think Leader Pelosi should call Moscow Mitch and tell him if he turns the Senate trial into a travesty, Trump will be the first president to be impeached twice. Still plenty of crimes to do.
Amen.
And the second thing is every time that the Republicans are banging on Hunter Biden, why aren't the Democrats banging on Trump's kids? Because they're way more corrupt.
I agree. And Trump's kids, there's plenty of evidence that they've committed fraud, that they've committed, all kinds of tax crimes. I mean, it just goes on, and not money laundering, all this kind of stuff. I absolutely agree with you. So anyway, thank you. Cassandra in White Plains, New York. Hey, Cassandra, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my call and for saving my sanity. Without your show, I think I'd be totally crazy.
What's up?
But I'm concerned about removing Trump from office. Then Pence becomes vice president, and everyone says, oh, he's boring, nobody likes him. But what if he picks Nikki Haley as his Veep?
Which he almost certainly would do.
Right. And the way she's talking, she's so obsequious and everything. It's almost as if the deal is already in the bag.
Yeah.
And corporate America would kind of like that. I mean, everybody would love Nikki Haley. She's a woman. She's a woman of color. Yes, she's conservative. She's got a little street cred because she took the Confederate thing off the flag of South Carolina.
Yep.
I mean, everybody goes to sleep. We need Trump to...
I'm sorry.
We need Trump to be in office to get people to the polls so that we can take back the Senate.
Well, I don't think there's, frankly, any possibility that he's going to be removed from office, even if Bolton comes in and testifies to this, because they're all going to grab onto Dershowitz's testimony that, well, that's not an impeachable offense, actually. But I do think the one thing that I think is interesting is if so far Mike Pence has been keeping his head down. If he sticks his head up, even with the smallest little peep, to say, well, I wasn't involved with this or anything like that, anything to defend himself. And there was a thing that came out of his office last night or this morning, but it didn't quite hit that point. But if he does, Trump is going to say, that guy's disloyal, and that's going to be the excuse he's going to use to replace Pence with Nikki Haley. And then Trump just doubled the chances that he gets reelected.
Right.
And I've talked about this before.
Nikki Haley is the one you got to keep your eye on at this point.
Yes, absolutely. She is the wild card in the Republican hand. And, look out. Cassandra, you nailed it. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be back. I want to get into, we can continue this conversation in the second hour, but I also want to get into the Wuhan virus and what it means and what's being done about it, and the consequence. There's just a whole bunch of stuff here to talk about with regard to that and single-payer health care. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for the hidden history of voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Medical Apartheid, the Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. This is from the introduction. On a sylvan stretch of New York's patrician Upper Fifth Avenue, just across from the New York Academy of Medicine, a colossus in marble, august inscriptions, and a bas-relief caduceus grace a memorial bordering Central Park. These laurels venerate the surgeon James Marion Sims, M.D., as a selfless benefactor of women. Nor is this the only statuary erected in honor of Dr. Sims. Marble monuments to his skill, benevolence, and humanity guard his native South Carolina State House, its medical school, the Alabama Capitol grounds, and a French hospital. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Sims dedicated his career to the care and cure of women's disorders and opened the nation's first hospital for women in New York City. He attended French royalty, his Grecian visage inspired oil portraits, and in 1875 he was elected president of the American Medical Association. Hospitals still bear his name, including a West African hospital that utilizes the eponymous gynecological instruments that he at first invented for surgeries upon black female slaves in the 1840s. But this benevolent image vies with the detached Marion Sims portrayed in Robert Thom's J. Marion Sims, Gynecological Surgeon, an oil representation of an experimental surgery upon his powerless slave, Betsy. Sims stands aloof, arms folded, one hand holding a metroscope, the forerunner of the speculum, as he regards the kneeling woman in a coolly evaluative medical gaze. His tie and morning coat contrast with her simple servant's dress, head rag, and bare feet. The painting, commissioned and distributed by the Park Davis Pharmaceutical House more than a century after the surgeries, as one of its History and Medicine in Pictures series, takes telling liberties with the historical facts. Thom portrays Betsy as a fully clothed, calm slave woman who kneels complacently on a small table, hand modestly raised to her breast before a trio of white male physicians. Two other slave women peer around a sheet, apparently hung for modesty's sake, in a childlike display of curiosity. This innocuous tableau could hardly differ more from the gruesome reality in which each surgical scene was a violent struggle between the slaves and physicians, and each woman's body was a bloodied battleground. Each naked, unanesthetized slave woman had to be forcibly restrained by the other physicians through her shrieks of agony as Sims determinedly sliced, then sutured her genitalia. The other doctors who could fled when they could bear the horrific screams no longer. It then fell to the women to restrain one another. I wanted to reproduce Thom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in the text, but when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Incorporated, the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this, and I used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image within the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter and an outline of the book. The Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barriers some choose to erect in order to veil the history of unconscionable medical research with blacks. Betsy's voice has been silenced by history, but as one reads Sims' biographers and his own memoirs, a haughty, self-absorbed researcher emerges. a man who bought black women slaves and addicted them to morphine in order to perform dozens of exquisitely painful, distressingly intimate vaginal surgeries. Not until he had experimented with his surgeries on Betsy and her fellow slaves for years did Sims essay to cure white women. Was Sims a savior or a sadist? It depends, I suppose, on the color of the women you ask. Marion Sims epitomizes the two faces, one benign, one malevolent, of American medical research. Quote, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane. In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in Montgomery, Alabama, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march that had been attended by the black and white physicians of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. King had invited the doctors not only to give medical help to injured marchers, but also to witness the abuse suffered at the hands of segregationists. With these almost unnoticed words, King ushered in a new era in civil rights because, as Delegate to Congress Donna Christensen Christian, MD, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, has declared, health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Thus, Dr. King's alarm over racial health injustice was prescient, and were he alive today, his concerns would be redoubled. Mounting evidence of the racial health divide confronts us everywhere we look, from doubled black infant death rates to African-American life expectancies that fall years behind whites. Infant mortality of African Americans is twice that of whites. The book, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So there's this virus coming out of apparently out of a wild animal market in Wuhan, China, a city of 10 million people. And it has spread literally all around the world. We were just discussing, is it in South America and Africa yet? I'm not certain about those two continents, but, I think it's just a matter of time. This thing is moving around. And there's two considerations here. The first, and I'll get to the second in a few minutes, but which is that Wuhan is kind of the Detroit of China. And I want to get to the consequences and impact of that. But the first is that if a possible pandemic, in other words, we have 5 cases of this confirmed now in the United States. And one of the people who died in China day before yesterday was one of the doctors in one of the hospitals that's treating these folks. So, healthcare workers are at risk. There's just, a substantial concern, shall we say, around this virus. Here we are, the United States of America, supposedly the strongest, richest, most powerful country in the world. In fact, it looks like China is a little richer than we are, and their middle class is certainly much larger than ours, and et cetera. But here we are, number one, and we are literally the only developed country in the world without a coherent national health care system and infrastructure. We have 20 some odd million Americans who have absolutely no health insurance. We have over 100 million Americans, and frankly, I think you could make the argument that it's probably closer to 200 million Americans, particularly if you include the 1/3 of seniors who are on Medicare Advantage using privatized, for-profit health insurance rather than Medicare, that probably 2/3 of us are underinsured. Our insurance will crap out if we get really sick. And we're looking at a pandemic? This is the strongest argument that can be made for Medicare for all, for a national single-payer healthcare system, like Canada has, like France has, like Germany has, like Spain has, fill in the blanks, right? Like every developed country in the world has a national healthcare system, except the United States. Now, President Obama tried to give us a national healthcare system. It was imperfect. It relied on the profit motive. It relied on, heavily subsidizing the health insurance industry. But, President Obama tried. I mean, this was like a mid-step, God bless him, with Obamacare. And it would have covered everybody in America. It would have done it, at twice the expense of any other country in the world, with most of the profits going to the health insurance industry and the for-profit hospitals. But it would have worked. But John Roberts and 4 other conservatives on the Supreme Court blew a hole in the side of that, saying that Republican-controlled states could opt out of Medicaid expansion. And as a consequence of that, we've got tens of millions of people in this country with literally no health insurance and the possibility of a pandemic coming to our shores. And what do people who don't have health insurance or who are underinsured, who have $5,000 deductibles, and they're that 50% of Americans who could not survive a $500 expense? What do they do when they get sick? They stay home. Or they even, if they're facing an economic hard times, and most of them are, we're talking, the bottom half of America economically, if they don't go to work, they probably don't get paid because they're hourly rather than salaried employees, or they don't have sick time or sick days, or both. And so, they go to work and they spread contagious diseases. This is, we got 35,000 Americans who die every year from the flu, which is exacerbated by this exact same situation. I mean, the guy at the, in the cook or the busboy or the person hauling plates around in the restaurant where you're going to eat this week almost certainly does not have health insurance. And if that person has the flu or has a virus or has anything and sneezes on their hands or sneezes on your plate, you wouldn't even know it. And boom, we're getting sick just from going out to dinner. Every other country in the world has figured out that a national health care system is part of their national security infrastructure. And in fact, this is how it was presented by Franklin Roosevelt, for God's sake, when he proposed it back in the 1930s. By Harry Truman when he proposed it in the 1940s. By Lyndon Johnson when he proposed it in the 1960s. The Republican opposition to a national health care system literally goes back a half a century or more. I mean, it goes back to the 30s. That's nearly a century. And a national health care system, first of all, it would cut our health care bill in half. We pay twice as much as Canada pays, and you don't see sick people in Canada as a result of their health care system. You don't see a situation in Canada where people go to work and spread diseases or don't go to the doctor and get sicker and sicker and infect more and more people because they can't afford to go to the doctor. You just don't see it in Canada. We have that here in the United States right now. Odds are the person sitting next to you on the bus or the Uber driver driving your car, particularly if they're in the early stages of an infection when they're contagious but they're not all that symptomatic, hasn't gone to the doctor, won't go to the doctor because they can't afford it. This is in all probability going to turn into a worldwide battle. China is building 2 hospitals right now, and it's going to take them 3 weeks to put these hospitals up around the city of Wuhan. Franklin Roosevelt, in his second Bill of Rights, said health care should be a right. He also said education, including college, should be a right. Housing should be a right, and decent pay in your work, and in fact, the presence of a job should be a right. So if the capitalist system, if our economic system fails to provide a job at all, or fails to provide a job that pays well, if it fails to provide a job that pays well, we're going to change the rules of the game so that employers have to pay well. And if there is no job, the government will create one. That was what the WPA and the CCC and all these other programs, the National Reconstruction Administration, which the Supreme Court struck down in the early 1930s. It's what led to FDR's court packing scheme. That's what those things were all about. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is straightforward stuff. And it's time, in my opinion, for all of us and for the Democrats. I mean, this is a marvelous opportunity for the Democrats who support a national single-payer health care system. Even if it's a watered-down one like Buttigieg's. For Democrats who support a national health care system of any sort, but the one that actually covers everybody, like Obamacare was intended to do, to say this isn't just about saving $1 trillion a year. This isn't just about making sure that people have the right to get health care when they're sick, just, a basic human right. This is also about the security of the United States, the national security of the United States. If Americans die in a pandemic, blame the GOP. Because they have been fighting this for 90 years. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'll be back with part 2 of my rant about the Wuhan virus and what's going on in Wuhan and how that could affect the world in other ways right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Susie in Vaughan, Washington. Hey, Susie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I hope this segues into what you were just talking about, but I just want to say that if things go the way we assume they're going to go with this whole impeachment farce, then I think each and every one of us should wear a black armband, and if anybody asks us, well, what are you wearing your armband for? You say, I'm mourning the death of America. End of story.
Or the death of American democracy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and it segues into this whole thing you're talking about. A pandemic. Excuse me. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Yeah, well said. Thank you very much, Susie. Great to hear from you.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Joy in North Fork Valley, Colorado. Hey, Joy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to counter the possibility of Pence and Nikki Haley with Bernie and Stacey Abrams. I think it would be a fabulous ticket. Warren will be Treasury Secretary and a whole lot, and we can still save our world. And Warren would be way better as Treasury Secretary than, sitting around being the Vice President. She's critically needed for her, for her financial wisdom.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
I would be fine with that. I would also be fine with Warren as president and Bernie as Treasury Secretary, or as Secretary of HEW and in charge of creating, free college education and a national health care system. I'm fine with either one of them. They are both perceived as outsiders. They are both they both terrify the billionaire class right now, or at least the greedy billionaire class. Tom Steyer's out there being a progressive, but there's very few billionaires who are not, hardcore right wingers, tragically. And I think you make a good point. Thank you very much for the call, Joy. It's good talking with you. Doug in Chandler, Arizona. Hey, Doug, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
I'm really concerned about something, even to the point of being alarmed.
Okay.
The Republicans are very good at scheming. And I have a notion that this John Bolton shiny new object is nothing but a scam.
Well, I guarantee you that there's going to be a lot of stuff in Bolton's book that attacks Democrats. And so, I think that, part of this strategy that McConnell is considering of going into a SCIF, going into a secure room and reading his book, the Republicans can then come out and say, well, Bolton in his book says this about Joe Biden, or Bolton in his book says that about the Democrats. I see that as part of their strategy. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm saying that if I look at the timing of the impeachment and Bolton resigning, and I think that the whole plan is to get him to testify, and then he's going to say, oh, well, no, I guess Trump's okay. we don't know what's in the book.
Well, we're starting to learn what's in the book.
Leaked, probably out of the White House on purpose.
Well, we don't know. I mean, the New York Times has obtained a copy of it, and the two little gems that they have dropped so far have both been anti-Trump gems. One that he's sucking up to autocrats like Erdogan and Xi, and the other that he actually was engaged in a quid pro quo, and he was up front with Bolton about it. But what else is in the book? I don't know, but I'm guessing that he's gonna take as many Democratic scalps as Republican. Is that a racist metaphor? I guess it probably is. My apologies. Anyhow, Doug, I think that's what he's going to do. But we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. 19 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We also have a Science Revolution podcast out there. Wanted to talk about, kind of part 2 of the Wuhan virus here. Wuhan, China. Most Americans have no idea what or even where Wuhan, China is. They're figuring out that it's a city, but, what kind of city and what it's all about. Wuhan is the Detroit of China. If you think of Detroit, not in today's process, post NAFTA and post WTO and all that stuff, but think of Detroit before the Clinton presidency, before 1992. Detroit was the epicenter of manufacturing in the United States. And echoing out from Detroit, there were millions of people in Detroit who worked in manufacturing. They built mostly cars, but they built lots of stuff in Detroit. They built refrigerators in Detroit. They built air conditioning units in Detroit. They built TV sets in Detroit. They built all kinds of stuff. Jerry Schneiderman and I used to own a company, Langley St. Clair Instrumentation Systems, back in the 80s. We sold picture tubes for TRS-80 Model 3s and other, this was early computer days, right? This was in the 80s. And our picture tubes, about half of them were manufactured in Detroit. Detroit made things. Now, granted, most of those jobs have now gone to China. And where have they gone in China? Wuhan. Wuhan is the industrial epicenter of China. And just like, Detroit made things, and therefore, draw a 500-mile circle around Detroit, and you would have all these cities in Michigan, in Ohio, in Indiana, where there were secondary manufacturing facilities where they were making, like car radios and steering wheel assemblies and airbags, and, car radios are now made in China. The steering wheel assemblies are now made in China, or in Mexico, rather. The airbags are now made in Japan, actually. But we used to make all that stuff in the cities around Detroit. And that's how, so if you think of Detroit in 1991, that's how Wuhan, China is right now. Okay, got that clear in your brain? Now the question, what if Wuhan shut down? What if it just shut down? What if Detroit shut down in 1991? What would that do to the U.S. economy? I'm telling you, get ready. There's some big stuff coming. But that's the smallest of the concerns. The larger concern is that, this virus gets out and it gets around the world, or another virus gets out. For example, the flu. One of the things that we're learning is that climate change is making for shorter winters, which you would think, since the flu season in the Northern Hemisphere is during the winter, you would think that would mean a shorter flu season. No, it actually turns out in tropical climates, you've got flu year-round. And apparently there's this tipping point where when your summers become a certain length, you end up with flu year-round. And if you have flu year-round, according to Robert Schooley, an infectious disease specialist who is the editor of the journal Clinical Infectious Diseases, he says, it would not be surprising to see a year-round influenza zone expand as the world warms. A warm climate promotes sustained transmission of the flu as opposed to seasonal outbreaks, so we might get flu year-round. Now, what does that mean? Well, currently, this from an article from Nexus Media by Marlene Simmons. Currently in the United States, the virus evolves for several months during the winter and stops evolving in the spring. If the mutations of the flu virus, if the virus continues changing year-round, we could begin to see more dangerous forms of influenza. Isn't that wonderful? Then they just sawed into some 15,000-year-old glacier ice that they got from the Chinese region of Tibet, these scientists. And what do they find? 33 groups of virus genuses. Now, keep in mind, the species is the smallest subset. So these are whole families, essentially, not using literally that word in the scientific meaning, but whole groups of viruses, 28 of which were previously unknown to science. The researchers warn that in a worst-case scenario, one or more of these viruses, as one Twitter user said, we've opened up a Pandora's box with climate change. One or more of these viruses might be a human pathogen or a mammalian pathogen that could mutate to be a human pathogen, like this coronavirus did in China. I mean, the permafrost, last year in Siberia, or in 2016, in Siberia, because the permafrost is melting all over the world, Siberia is mostly permafrost, this 75-year-old dead reindeer bubbled up to the surface, and it could have easily have been a 7,500-year-old, because most of the permafrost is 10,000 years old, that had died of anthrax. Now, this part of the world hadn't seen anthrax since 1941. There hadn't been an anthrax outbreak. But 72 nomadic herders, 41 children were hospitalized. A 12-year-old died because this reindeer floated up to the surface, this dead reindeer. And down the road in Siberia, last year, they discovered in thawed-out permafrost, a 30,000-year-old giant virus, in other words, a more sophisticated, more modern kind of virus, 30,000 years old, that was still able to infect bacteria or single-celled organisms, amoebas, 30,000-year-old virus, still contagious. 22.5% of the northern hemisphere is permafrost. 50% of Canada's landmass. And it is melting right now. Dr. Richard Dixon points out that in some of the melting in Northern Europe, it has unearthed bodies, human bodies, that died from the Spanish flu in 1918. There in another place, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact city, it's just a reference to it, fragments of smallpox found. So ancient diseases or older diseases coming back to haunt us as a consequence of climate change. And in the face of this, the United States is the only country in the world without a national health care system to deal with these potential threats. How insane is that, scientifically speaking, or even just thoughtfully speaking?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're going to check in with the Redneck Rebellion right after this, and then I'll be picking up your calls. Stick around. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimring and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number, the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimring and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, new research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest, end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates, end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Stephen Smith, he is the progressive candidate for governor of West Virginia. WVCan'tWait.com is the website. It's also the Twitter handle. And he is taking on billionaire Governor Jim Justice, and he's doing it with small donors and evoking the Battle of Blair Mountain. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Or Stephen, I should say. My apologies. So, okay. Tell us about how, what it's like in the state of West Virginia to take on a billionaire, and a friend of mine, in fact, our old producer, Troy Miller, referred to what you're doing as the new Redneck Rebellion. I don't know if you use that phrase or not, but what are you doing? What's unique about your campaign here?
Yeah, well, to answer your question, it's thrilling. That what we are offering is the only campaign in recent West Virginia history that doesn't lie to voters, right? The central lie of politics is, trust me, I'll fix it. But we know from history that never in American history, certainly never in West Virginia history, has one politician brought the kind of change our state desperately needs. Only unions can do that. Only movements can do that. And so that's the kind of campaign we're building. 55 county teams, volunteer teams in West Virginia built up over the last year, 39 additional constituency teams. Veterans can't wait. Seniors can't wait. Students can't wait. The latest one we launched was an ex-offender organizing team. And all of this political infrastructure, this machine, doesn't have one person's name on it, right? It's not Kanawha County for Smith. It's Kanawha County Can't Wait, so that we build the kind of independent political power that lasts beyond one race and beyond one election.
That is great. And I hope more Democrats are learning from what you're doing there in West Virginia. We're talking with Stephen Smith. He's running for governor of West Virginia on the Democratic side. I understand your campaign draws inspiration from the Battle of Blair Mountain. What was that?
So 100 years ago, the bloodiest labor conflict in American history happened in West Virginia when black, white, and immigrant miners marched south against company rule, and they marched against the local political bosses. They marched against the company bosses. They marched against Baldwin Felts agents. They even marched against the federal government of the United States, which tried to stop them. And it's a reminder to us as West Virginians and as Americans that we are at our strongest and our most powerful, and we scare the establishment the most precisely in the moments where we align across race, immigration status, religion, to fight for all of us. And that's what we're trying to do in our campaign. And of course, we saw that history reemerge less than 2 years ago when the West Virginia teachers and school service personnel sparked this nationwide movement.
That's right. I had forgotten, and we saw the same thing happen in Washington State, just north of here, where I live in Portland, Oregon, and we've seen it in state after state. That all started in West Virginia. You're absolutely right. So where do you go from here? When is the election's in November, I guess. So
Well, there's a primary. We've got a primary in May, and a couple of the things we've tried to do along the way are really change what electoral politics looks and feels like. So, for example, rather than writing our platform with a couple of advisors in a living room, or heaven forbid, contacting some political consultants and having them write our platform, we took a whole year, 157 town halls across the state, more than 600 visits, literally 11,000 conversations, voter to voter. We took all of that information and built a people's platform from the bottom up so that we have something to run on that was literally written by the people of West Virginia. Our Workers' Bill of Rights, language in it was written by nurses. Our education plan, language in it was written by teachers and bus drivers. And so what we get to run on is not a handful of slogans, but detailed plans, more than 32 detailed state-level policy plans that do things like fully legalize cannabis, start a public bank so that we have capital owned by the people of the state, a corporate crime and political corruption division in the state police so that our state police force are going after the real criminals in our society, prescription drug caps, a wealth tax, what would be the first state-level wealth tax levied against financial wealth in West Virginia to pay to make our schools the best in the country, and what we call a small business revolution, where we take the enormous corporate tax breaks that we've passed over the years in West Virginia and instead use those to make West Virginia the best place in the country to start a small business or family farm or cooperative or a union shop. And that's how we win the government we want and the economy we want, is by stopping the practice of sending our wealth in West Virginia out of state.
Yeah, which has been going on for 100 years. Stephen Smith, progressive candidate for governor of West Virginia. The website is WV, as in West Virginia, can'twait.com, and that's also the Twitter handle. Stephen, I wish you the very best. Thanks for dropping by the program today.
Thank you so much. I'll do a quick shout out. We now have 77 candidates here in West Virginia who have signed on to our pledge, running up and down the ballot. So we appreciate all the support.
That is great. Well, keep it up. Keep it up. I wish you the very best. Thank you, Stephen. Stephen Smith, candidate for governor of the great state of West Virginia. So picking up some of your phone calls, Mike in Seattle. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, picking up on your pandemic concern, I was listening to one of the local BBC channels from England, and in the news, what they said is, do not go to the surgery, do not go to the hospital. If you think you have something, contact us, and we will come to you and take care of you. Whatever you need. That seems like a much better approach, and I don't think that this country could handle that at this point.
Oh, no, we don't have, we have no national healthcare infrastructure. I remember, 10, 15 years ago, I was giving a speech at King's College in outside of London, and we were staying with a family. We were staying with some friends of ours, and we had our youngest daughter with us. Jesus, must have been more like 15 long ago, anyway, because she was still a teenager. And she had a really bad ear infection, and I got back from the speech, and it was 11 o'clock at night. We called the local surgery, the local doctor's office kind of thing, in emergency care or whatever, and told him what was going on, and the doctor said, oh, fine, I'll be over there in just a few minutes. And he literally came over to the house and checked her out and wrote some, gave her some antibiotics. He had them in his doctor bag. And so the British are, this is a feature of British healthcare system. And so they're saying, don't come to the hospital, don't spread your possibly contagious disease. What, particularly if you think you may have Wuhan virus, or is this just general flu advice?
It was definitely about the new epidemic, I think.
Okay.
Just a concern about it.
So if you think that you're carrying this thing, don't come here, we'll come to you. Can you imagine? We literally don't have systems for that here in the United States, and they do in other countries. It's just incredible. Thank you for the call, Mike. That's fascinating. Susan in Alsip, Illinois. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Back to the impeachment for just a moment.
Sure, yeah.
And I have a second tiny question on the tail end of that. You were talking about the advantages of having Biden testify.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand what you're saying. And at the same time, I'm very, very concerned that this would take the focus off of Trump and his impeachment, as the circus will continue, and they'll be looking at all these other points.
But see, that circus is going to happen anyway. And if Biden is the nominee, that circus is going to happen in October and November, particularly when they start drilling into Hunter Biden going with Joe to China. Trump has now had 2 meetings with President Xi about this topic that we know of, where he has raised the issue of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden going to China. Hunter Biden has a 10% stake in I believe it was a hedge fund, some sort of financial institution, and the Chinese bank gave that financial institution a big pile of money. According to Trump, it was $1 billion. I don't know what it actually is. This stuff is going to come out. It's going to be dealt with, and why not deal with it now?
Well, I'm scared it would take front and center when Trump's impeachment.
Well, if it takes, I get that, and I don't want to distract the focus from Trump, but I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We could, talk about the Bidens for a couple of hours and then go back to Trump. But my concern is if this information is so bad that it needs to be covered up or hidden or, don't talk about it or how dare you, then Joe Biden is a flawed candidate. And if it's not that bad, Joe Biden needs to put this behind him. This is like the debate. I remember this debate, Susan, that we had back 12 years ago, if I'm remembering right, about the Swift boat veterans. I had Jerome Corsi on this. This was in 2004 in the John Kerry election. It was the second year that this program was on the air. And Jerry Corsi came on this program. He just published this book, Swift Boat Veterans, or whatever it was, about the Swift boats. And saying that, John Kerry was not a war hero. He went around trying to get himself nicked up so he could get Purple Hearts and things. And John Kerry didn't respond to that. And it hurt him. It hurt him badly. I mean, I'm just concerned that we're preparing to make the same mistake again. That we're not dealing with this stuff. You can't let Republican attacks. The same thing with Hillary Clinton and her emails, and all this other stuff. It's like deal with it early on. Is my take. Susan, thank you for the call. I just think if Joe Biden has a strong case to say this is not a crime, this is not an issue, or this is not my issue, he should be making that right now. It would help him in the polls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
In fact, you could help him tremendously in the primary. And if he doesn't have an answer for it, then God help us if he's the nominee. We'll be back. And welcome back. Bob in Santa Rosa. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
I'm great, but I'll get better. How are you, Bob?
Yeah, under the circumstances, yes. I just want to disagree about Joe Biden. I think he's the worst candidate that has ever been put up in my lifetime for the Democrats.
Well, I don't know if you're disagreeing with me or not. I'm not saying that he's a good candidate or a bad candidate. I'm in favor. I'm more in favor of either Sanders or Warren. That's my, I'll put my preference right up front. All the rest of them, all the other candidates that are taking corporate money, they kind of fall into one giant lump in my mind. But, if Biden is going to be our nominee, then we need to make sure that we've got this behind us, because we went through this with John Kerry, and it bit him in the butt badly.
This isn't why. This isn't why I'll never vote for Joe Biden under any circumstance.
Well, then, Bob, you're making a huge mistake. If Joe Biden is the nominee, you're voting for Donald Trump.
Let me finish my proposition, okay? I live in California, so my vote doesn't count anyway. So I'm going to vote green. If Biden, I did 4 years behind bars because of Joe Biden personally.
Wow.
Being against legalization of weed.
Yeah.
But I will never forgive him for Anita Hill. I will never forgive him for being the senator from MasterCard.
Yeah.
He's the biggest pro-capitalist we could put in there. And what we need is to be away from capitalism, which means that Bernie is the only choice.
Yeah,
he's the only one. He's the only choice.
Yeah, okay.
And anybody
Bob,
else will lose, and it doesn't matter.
Bob, I get it. And your point that you're in California and therefore your vote doesn't count is actually, something that I can't rebut. In 2000, I lived in Vermont, and I voted for Ralph Nader because I lived in Vermont. I knew Vermont was going to go for Al Gore. So, and in fact, Louise and I split our vote. She disagreed with me. She voted for Al Gore. She said, even though we live in a state where your vote doesn't count. But I don't think we can take anything for advantage. You can probably, or for granted rather, you can probably take California for granted. But I even that, I'm a little sketchy about. Patrick in Lakewood, California. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Long time no talk.
Hey, thank you for calling.
Haven't called.
What's on your mind?
Haven't. Sorry, my dogs are on.
That's okay.
Postman.
Let's get right to it, Patrick. We've got just a minute left.
Netflix has a series in documentaries on pandemic, actually called "Pandemic: How to Avoid an Outbreak."
So if you're a Netflix subscriber and you just plug "pandemic" into the search engine, it pops right up?
Absolutely. And I'm looking at the screen right here. It is approximately a 6-hour, broken up in 50-minute increments. It's certainly watchable, and it's very educational. I've seen the first one.
Yeah. Huh. Fascinating.
To your...
Does it encourage you or scare you? Or both?
Educates me.
Educates you. Okay. All right. I'll have to check it out. Louise and I will check it out maybe this weekend or something. Patrick, thank you for the call. Fascinating stuff. We'll be right back. Taking your calls here on pretty much anything we've talked about today, whether it's the election, the impeachment, climate change, national health care system, politics, running for local office. We'll be back. Stick around. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Michael in Winter Haven, Florida. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I'd like to not disagree, but modify what you said in the first hour about if Trump isn't removed, it'll give every president the idea that in the future that he or she can get away with anything.
Right.
President Obama, probably one of the least corrupt presidents we've ever had, didn't have either of the House for most of his administration, and believe me, he didn't even have to do half of what Trump did to be removed from office. I think the president has to have one of the houses in his party in order to get away with stuff. But that's the only change I would make.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Michael. Carl in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Carl, what's up?
Yes, hi, Tom. As usual, trying to track your shows is like trying to catch a wild mouse in your house.
Thank you.
Well, it branches, it ramifies.
Yeah.
First, a little quick addendum to your information. It was like 10 years ago, must have been closer to 15, a female grad student postulated the concept of could there be viruses lurking in the environment, and she created a whole new branch of research on archaeoviri. Mm-hmm. She found what she believed were dinosaur viruses, pelagic, free-floating in the ocean.
Right. Oh, I'm familiar with that. And some mind-boggling statistic, 1 tablespoon or teaspoon of seawater contains like 1 billion viruses. I mean, it's like, viruses are just everywhere. Most of them are completely irrelevant to us.
The point is that not all of these viruses are going to affect humans. Right. Because a dinosaur had a considerable considerably different physiology.
Right, although they may infect fish, because fish are from that era.
Some fish are, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you for that, Carl. I appreciate the call. Terry in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I want to talk about Ukraine real quick.
Go for it.
I don't know if you've heard anyone ask this question. It just occurred to me the other day, but if I was President Zelensky and I desperately needed this money and I desperately needed the legitimacy of a White House meeting with the president, why didn't he just announce that he was going to investigate the Bidens? Because the money was withheld for 3 months. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Trump should be removed from office for many things, but I was just curious if anyone has asked that question. And
yes, that question has been asked, and the answer, I think, is fairly apparent. Zelensky ran for president of Ukraine on the platform of no more
anti-corruption.
Yeah, no more corruption. And launching a baseless investigation, and a redundant one for that matter. Burisma had already been investigated, and the investigation was closed down. And Hunter Biden was looked into by the U.S. State Department, for that matter, by the Obama administration. So he knew that there was no there, or at least this is the story we hear from the Bidens. And he knew that there was no there. So for him to open an investigation would be corruption in and of itself, and it would contradict what he actually ran for as president.
But there's no way he's going to admit that publicly, right?
No, but it would become obvious. I think it would be evident.
Yeah.
He would be seen as Trump's toady, and that's not a good image these days. So I think that's what's going on. Thanks a lot for the call, Terry. John in Westchester, New York. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you today?
Great. What's on your mind?
Doing better. Yeah, I'm very concerned about the national health care, and I have children, and I'm concerned about the discrimination, the economic discrimination that's starting, as concerned with. Hello?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay, I'm concerned because unfortunately the jobs are going to start disappearing, and unfortunately I'm a skilled laborer. I'm a skilled union worker, and I can see my job being phased out within 20 years. I have apprentices coming in at 20-something years old, and I fear for them because their jobs are going to be eliminated. Now, when you do this, you're going to have 2/3. I guess it would be about 2/3 of the population will be phased out due to either technology, innovation, robotics. And unfortunately, the discrimination, economic discrimination, is just going to become larger and larger.
Right. Well, let me just put this in a historical context. Prior to 1965, prior to Medicare and Medicaid, we had nothing. You threw yourself on the mercy of the hospital or your neighbors. In fact, it wasn't until the 1980s that Reagan actually signed off on a law that hospitals have to take people in emergency rooms even if they don't have insurance. They used to turn people away from emergency rooms who were brought in from like car accidents and things. No, sorry, we won't see you.
I know, but now it's a small percentage of people. Well,
it's a much smaller percentage now, but you're right. We're moving in the wrong direction. And that's why I think we need a national health care system.
Well, I think it's more than that. I think you have to feed these people also, and you have to. There has to be a 20-year plan. I mean, they really have to look down the line 20 years.
I am absolutely with you. Andrew Yang talks about this. I think more of the candidates need to be talking about this, the impact of automation, the impact of offshoring, the impact of the changes in the job market, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, there's a lot going on. Stick around. We're going to be back. Mary Christina Wood, who helped put together this incredible lawsuit, these young people, the Giuliani case, is going to drop by and let us know what's up with that.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
This is from the introduction. Our book today is Why You Should Be a Socialist by Nathan J. Robinson. This is from the introduction. In the last few years, U.S. politics has become completely upended. The presidency of Donald Trump, which took politicians and commentators by total surprise, shattered a number of Washington orthodoxies. Very few experts thought that a vicious, loutish reality TV star was capable of rising to the nation's highest office. But they had misjudged political reality and forgot the cardinal rule: anything can happen. Trump's improbable rise to power was not the only political irregularity to occur over the last several years. While Trump was defeating the most powerful figures in the country's two major political parties, another unexpected phenomenon was occurring: the rise of a new radicalism on the left. When Bernie Sanders began his campaign for the 2016 presidential nomination, nobody expected him to pose a serious challenge to Hillary Clinton. Clinton was the consensus choice of the party establishment, and influential Democrats openly said it was her turn. Sanders was in the race as a protest candidate. Not only was he considered a marginal figure in Washington, lacking both connections and funding, but he did not have any of the characteristics that traditionally made one electable. He was from a tiny state known for hippies and cheese. He was old. He was not particularly photogenic, polished, or popular. And he was an avowed socialist in a country that had had a half-century Cold War between good American capitalism and evil Soviet socialism. It was not, however, a year in which the traditional criteria of electability would have mattered especially much. Sanders, perhaps as much to his own surprise as anyone else's, quickly attracted a significant following. His radical message, stingingly critical of the existing Democratic Party, resonated strongly with progressives who felt let down by Obama and viewed Clinton as part of an uninspiring and possibly corrupt political dynasty. When the first primary contest came around, February's 2016 Iowa caucuses, Sanders achieved a shockingly strong result, coming close to beating Clinton outright. As Sanders began to fill stadiums with crowds, attracting a highly visible and well-organized following, it quickly became clear that the race would not be the coronation that Clinton had anticipated. Clinton ultimately won the Democratic nomination, but it took a bruising fight. Sanders was no mere protest candidate. He was a serious competitor who won 23 contests to Clinton's 34. While Clinton received over 16 million votes across the various primaries, Sanders achieved a remarkable 13 million. It was surprising enough that a socialist candidate could be anything more than a gadfly in a major party nominating contest. It was downright stunning that such a candidate could rack up nearly 24 primary victories against one of the most experienced and well-connected members of the Democratic Party. Sanders' unexpected rise to prominence represented an extraordinary shift in the political landscape. The nearest precedent was Eugene Debs' 1920 presidential run on the Socialist Party ticket. Debs achieved nearly 1 million votes despite being in prison for defying the World War I draft. But even Debs didn't pose a serious electoral threat to the dominant parties, receiving only 3% of the general election vote. Sanders, who once recorded a spoken-word Eugene Debs tribute album and kept a portrait of Debs in his office while mayor of Burlington, Vermont, achieved a far greater measure of success. He may not have started the political revolution that he often spoke of, but he came relatively close to poaching the presidential nomination from the party elite's pre-selected candidate. The Sanders campaign was fueled by millennials whose dissatisfaction with mainstream Democrats made them highly responsive to Sanders' progressive message. Clinton may have had more support than Sanders overall, but young people of all races and genders preferred Sanders over Clinton by large margins. With the exception of Lena Dunham, it was hard to find many people under 30 who had much enthusiasm for Clinton, a candidate they associated with Wall Street cronyism and the Iraq disaster. Sanders' success with millennials, while unanticipated by pollsters, did not occur purely because of Sanders' political skill. It happened because a revolt had been brewing among young progressives for years, as they had steadily grown more and more alienated from the Democratic Party mainstream. Ever since the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011, young people in the United States have become increasingly radicalized, weighted down with debt, paying through the nose for health insurance, unable to afford to have kids, and frustrated by an undemocratic political system that implements the policy preferences of rich elites. Millennials were both frustrated and tired. Sanders came along at just the right moment. They had been waiting for someone to say what was on their minds, that the economic and political systems were unfair at their core and needed a drastic overhaul. But the Sanders campaign was just the start. Joe Crowley had been in Congress for 20 years and was one of the highest-ranking members of the House Democrats. He was considered a serious contender for the party leadership and known in his New York district as a well-connected part of the local Democratic machine. He was the sort of backroom deal-making congressman whose influence is disproportionate to his name recognition. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was not an important figure in the Democratic Party. Far from it. She was a 28-year-old bartender and activist who had once interned for Ted Kennedy and had worked for Bernie Sanders' campaign. A member of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, she was considered the longest of long shots in her primary contest against Crowley. Crowley had endorsements from powerful political organizations like the AFL-CIO, the Human Rights Campaign, and Planned Parenthood. And it goes on from there. Why You Should Be a Socialist by Nathan Robinson. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
On the line with us is Mary Christina Wood. She's the Philip H. Knight Professor and Faculty Director, of the Environmental and Natural Resources Law Center at the University of Oregon School of Law. Go Ducks! The website law.uoregon.edu or ourchildrenstrust.org, actually, more importantly, because she came up with the legal theory, in fact, wrote a book about it, that was used in this in the lawsuit, the Our Children's Trust, or also known as the Juliana lawsuit, against the federal government, saying that basically you guys are taking away our futures. Mary, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on.
Great having you back on. It's been a while, so if you could just recap for us, first of all, the rationale for this lawsuit. What is the legal theory that you're using in layman's terms to argue that the federal government, to argue what you're arguing? In fact, you need to define exactly what you're arguing as well.
Yeah, first I'll clarify, I'm not involved in the litigation. I write about and speak about it, but I'll characterize what the lawyers in the case are arguing. Basically, the case is brought on behalf of 21 youth plaintiffs, and they are arguing that the government's fossil fuel policies are endangering their prospects for survival in the century, and that by bringing the nation to climate disaster, the federal government is violating two sets of rights. One, under the Due Process Clause, their rights to life, liberty, and property. And the second is under the Federal Public Trust Doctrine, which is a principle that dates back to Roman times, that requires government to protect crucial resources for the citizens' survival.
And that was the theory that you brilliantly laid out in your book, as I recall.
That's right. I focused on the public trust. This lawsuit is actually bringing the constitutional claim as well under the Due Process Clause.
Right. Now, the headlines last week were that, youth climate lawsuit shot down by the Ninth Circuit Court, and much of the press was treating this as if it was dead. What actually happened?
Well, it's not at all dead. There's a second step with the Ninth Circuit. That is the plaintiffs, the 21 youth, have vowed to take a petition for en banc review. And what that means is they will ask the full court to look at whether the case merits further review by an 11-member panel.
Because originally it was just a 3-member panel that ruled against them. And it was only 2 out of 3 of them.
It was a divided panel.
Pardon?
It was a divided panel. There was a very vigorous dissent. So the plaintiffs will ask the full court to look at this case and say whether or not it deserves further review. If it does, and they get a majority of judges voting to give it further review, then they will have an 11-member panel look at the case, and that panel can change the original panel's decision.
And then if the Ninth Circuit rules in favor of the young people and saying, yeah, the federal government has an obligation to provide you with a future or not to steal your future, then it goes to the Supreme Court. Do I have that right?
Well, maybe not. It depends.
Mm-hmm.
If the en banc, as we call it, the en banc panel ruled in favor of these young people, they would send it back to trial. And the trial has never happened in this case. So, of course, the other party, the government, could appeal it to the Supreme Court of the United States, but they may not. It depends how the opinion is worded. If it's very, very narrow and represents a narrow victory for the plaintiffs, conceivably, it could go back to trial. When I said it never had trial in the first place, that's a very important point because most cases go to trial and then to the appellate body. This case never had that. This case was taken up on premature appeal. So there was never that fact-finding and development of a potential remedy, and that, I think, really shaped the panel's treatment of this case because they said, we just can't envision a remedy in this case.
Right, so
Normally, remedies are crafted by the trial judges.
Forgive my interruption. So essentially what the federal government is saying is, how dare you want to have a trial on this? We don't even want to discuss this in court. We're going to challenge your right to have a trial around this. Is that correct?
Pretty much. They did everything they could to prevent a trial. And again, most cases go to trial. That is the sequence of our judicial system. You put a case into trial, and then you bring an appeal so that the appellate court has a full factual record to assess the law against.
Right.
But in this case, the federal government, the Trump administration lawyers, were so, they just pulled out all the stops to prevent a trial, and they finally succeeded and got this premature appeal to the Ninth Circuit. Well, that sent the whole question of remedy, which we can talk about, sent it to the panel as an abstract hypothetical. So the panel's opinion that came down a week ago now really was hung up on the question of remedy because the panel couldn't envision any sort of tangible set of circumstances where the court would be appropriate in granting relief.
So what remedy are you seeking? The remedy is I guess it's self-evident. What remedy are you seeking?
Well, the plaintiff's attorneys seek a remedy that has several different components. One is they had an injunction in front of the Ninth Circuit to stop certain classes of further fossil fuel projects, and that's really important because we're so close to the tipping point that literally any more fossil fuel projects could put us over that climate cliff. And so there was a clear request for injunction to stop those projects. That's a pretty traditional form of relief. Mm-hmm. Another thing they asked for was a declaratory judgment, just the court declare that the government was violating these young people's constitutional rights. But what really got the court was their request for a plan, a court-supervised plan to decarbonize the economy and bring CO2 emissions down. And of course, those plans have been used. Plans have been used in other cases of institutional litigation, like the Brown v. Board of Education, the prison rights cases, educational funding cases, all sorts of.
Well, even the tobacco cases.
Maybe a little bit less so because those cases weren't against a government institution. But the point is that judges do craft relief for plaintiffs that suffer injuries. But this panel said no. They said even though we're being driven towards apocalypse, they literally used that language. The panel's opinion started out saying this is basically the eve of destruction. And they said that the federal government has known for decades what kind of catastrophe it would cause. They even admitted this could be the end of the nation. And yet the majority said the courts have no role in providing any relief. Go look to the political branches to find any relief.
So basically, what they're saying is this should be the responsibility of the legislative branch, not the judicial branch. You're talking to the wrong people. You should be talking to your legislators. Is that what the court?
Well, pretty much legislators and the Trump administration.
Right.
And yet,
good luck with that.
they do acknowledge very forthrightly that the current administration is just driving up fossil fuel production faster than any other country in the world. Judge Hurwitz, who wrote the majority opinion, said carbon levels have, this is his language, skyrocketed to levels not seen for almost 3 million years. And oil and gas extraction here in the United States is happening 4 times faster than that of any other nation, and we are approaching, in his exact words, the point of no return.
And this is the guy who said, no, this case can't be decided by us.
Correct.
So I'm guessing the dissent that said we should decide this case was even more blistering.
Well, yes. So the dissent starts her opinion. This is Judge Josephine Staten, who is a district court judge sitting by designation on the Ninth Circuit on this panel. And she began her dissent saying, it is as if an asteroid were barreling towards Earth, and the government decided to shut down our only defenses. The government bluntly insists it has the absolute and unreviewable power to destroy the nation. My colleagues throw up their hands. So in her mind, the courts absolutely have the duty to prevent willful destruction of the nation.
Wow. And potentially, at the very least of human civilization, and at the worst, the humanity itself. This is mind-boggling. Mary Christina Wood, the Philip H. Knight Professor and Faculty Director at the Environmental and Natural Resources Law Center at the University of Oregon School of Law. Go Ducks! And Mary Christina Wood, remind me of the name of the title of your book.
Nature's Trust. Environmental Law for a New Ecological Age. Nature's
Trust. Thank you very much. I have the book. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Mary Christina Wood, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, Jay Sekulow is making this argument right now that there's nothing to see here, no droids in this car, right? And welcome back. Susan in Snellville, Georgia. I've been to Snellville. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm calling because I want to know why journalists and mainstream media can get on TV and say that Trump is an authoritarian and he's acting like a dictator, but yet they won't come out and flatly say that he is a fascist, where you can actually go on Google and type in Trump is a fascist and find articles tying him to fascism, Hitler, and Mussolini since 2015. You can do the same on YouTube. When is the point where the mainstream media is at a point where we need to educate and inform properly the people on an everyday basis of what exactly is going on, and why aren't the mainstream media showing more of the resistance out on the street in Washington, D.C. with the Refuse Fascism organization? Why aren't they putting this on TV? Why aren't they letting people know what is really going on?
I think that they don't use the word fascist, Susan, because most Americans don't understand the history of the word fascist, or frankly, for that matter, the history of fascism, and they conflate Hitlerism or Nazism with fascism, and they're really different things. Hitler used fascism, and Hitler was a fascist ultimately, But fascism started with Mussolini, 4 or 5 years before Hitler rose to power in Italy. And, it's the merger of the corporations and state power. In fact, Mussolini dismissed the entire Italian parliament and said instead of voters sending representatives to the Italian parliament, in each parliamentary district, or the equivalent of a congressional district for us, the largest corporation would send a representative, and so it became the Chamber of Fascist Corporations. Was as he renamed the parliament. But because people conflate it with Hitlerism, I don't think you're ever going to hear the mainstream media, the corporate media in the United States, use the word fascist to describe Trump.
That's really sad.
Yeah, but I'm quite sure that that's the case. Susan, thank you very much for the call. I agree with you, by the way. I think you're spot on. Thank you. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I wanted to say these people that are calling in about Joe Biden.
Well, one guy called in who went to jail for pot, and he's upset that Biden played a role in that. Yeah.
All right. Well, that one person just told how many millions out there.
Right.
But my point is, Joe Biden knows where the bodies are buried. He knows where the system was broken, because Trump is trying to undo everything Barack Obama did. And in his craze, he's going far beyond what Barack Obama did. Sure. And I think that Trump voters ought to look at that. Joe Biden can go back and put back together everything that was broken.
So your argument for Biden is that he knows where the bodies are buried. He's been around for a long, long time, and he can use that knowledge to get things done. Is that the bottom line? That's essentially what you're saying. Yeah, it may well be, Corky. I can't argue with that logic. And also, I mean, the other thing that Joe Biden has demonstrated is that people can change. Joe Biden has repudiated his position on toughening the drug laws and stuff like that. So we'll see. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Ben in Hood River, Oregon. Hey, Ben, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. How are you today?
I'm great. What's on your mind?
So I just wanted to ask about getting out the vote. It's important. It's our duty as Americans. But what good is going to the polls when the field of candidates is effectively chosen by the wealthiest Americans and corporations? And how do we make voting matter and curtail the power of the wealthy?
Yeah, we have a huge hill to climb here, Ben. Yeah, we have a huge hill to climb here, and thank you for raising the issue. And that is that and I write about this in my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. In 1976 and 1978, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations and billionaires owning politicians, and then more recently in the McCutcheon decision, owning even hundreds of politicians, is not corruption or bribery, which is what it was from 1787 or 1789 right up to 1976. It's not corruption and bribery. It's First Amendment protected free speech. And as a consequence of that, we've got billions of dollars being spent. In fact, probably the Democratic primary is going to be $1 billion primary, maybe more. And the general election this year is probably going to be a $6 billion election. And also the 1976 decision, the Buckley decision, legalized individual billionaires paying for their own campaigns. So you've got Bloomberg and Steyer out there not taking a penny from anybody. Well, I guess Steyer is so that he can get into the debates. But basically, they're just pouring money into the whole process. So the challenge then, or the question is, how do you take that on? How do we undo that? And I think that 4 years ago, Bernie Sanders showed us that it can be done. I mean, he won, 23 states, I think, in the primary against Hillary Clinton. It was substantial. and won in some cases by huge margins, and he didn't take any corporate money. So it can be done. I mean, the question is whether it can be done at scale, whether it can be done, as running for president. And I'm guessing that the ultimate presidential candidate, whether it's Sanders or Warren, or if it is Sanders or Warren, let me rephrase that. And they try to run a campaign saying we're not going to take corporate money, they're going to have to allow super PACs to campaign on their behalf. And actually, they can't stop them. Because this is the air we breathe. This is the water that we swim in if we were a fish, because of the Supreme Court. And what it's going to take is electing enough progressives at the local level. In fact, even smaller than that, electing enough progressives, or getting enough progressives into the Democratic Party to be precinct committee people, and then have them nominating progressives in primaries, and then having, mobilizing progressive voters in the primaries to select progressives, and then having those progressives run for office and be supported by all of us. And I mean, we've got to seize some power here so that we can then begin the process of deconstructing this bribery-driven corporate state that the Supreme Court has given to us, period. Stephen in Peterborough, New Hampshire. Hey, Stephen, what's up?
Yeah, I have a question for you to put out there. Mm-hmm. And that is, like, if you take the Republicans' defense to its logical conclusion, meaning that the Justice Department can't indict a sitting president and the abuse of power is not impeachable, what would be the mechanism left if Trump or any president just decided he didn't want to leave the office? If he wanted to cancel the inauguration or negate the whole election, what mechanism do we have left to remove the president?
I think that's a whole separate argument, Steve, and it's not an illegitimate concern. I mean, Michael Cohen has already warned us that this is a very real danger. And Trump basically told us this, several hours before the election returns came in 3 years ago, where he said the election's rigged, and if Hillary wins, it was a wrongful victory, and I'm the real victor and stuff like that. And he's going to claim that this year if he loses too, and we have to be ready for that. But at the same time, my concern is not that. Because you wouldn't use impeachment to remove somebody from office who isn't legitimately holding that office anyway. I mean, that would provoke a crisis that would go way beyond impeachment. My concern is that the next president is like Trump, or maybe not the next one, let's say the one after the next one, or down the road at some point we get another president like Trump who is willing to engage in lawless behavior, willing to gaslight the American public and lie to us, and that president decides to do something truly destructive to this planet or to our democracy. And there's no longer a mechanism to hold him or her under, to keep them in check. And, it could be, they could lead us into World War III. They could, I mean, the damage that they could do, Steve, thank you for the call. The damage that they could do is absolutely mind-boggling. And now there is no check on their power. And what that means is that the presidency has been converted from, one branch of three equal branches to basically being emperor for life, or at least emperor for the term. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And in fact, perhaps a larger concern is what if Trump uses the Patriot Act to say, okay, we're in a state of national emergency. We're going to just call off the election. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann. This is from Chapter 3, Hunters in Our Schools and Offices, The Origin of ADHD. The earliest theories about attention deficit disorder characterized it as a diseased state that had to do with brain damage or dysfunction. At various times, it has been lumped in with fetal alcohol syndrome, mental retardation, various genetic mental illnesses, psychiatric disorders resulting from early trauma or childhood abuse, and the theory that parental smoking led to fetal oxygen deprivation. Prior to the 1970s, when ADHD was first characterized as a specific disorder, ADHD children and adults were largely treated simply as bad people, even though attentional deficits have been recognized in the psychological literature since 1905. They were the kids who always got into trouble, the James Deans of the world, the rootless and unsettled adults like Abraham Lincoln's father, the Lone Ranger, or John Dillinger. More recent research, however, has demonstrated a high incidence of ADHD among the parents of ADHD kids. This discovery caused some psychologists to initially postulate that ADHD was the result of growing up in a dysfunctional family. They suggested that ADHD may follow the same pattern as child or spousal abuse, moving through generations as learned behavior. The dietary-causing advocates contended that children's pattern their parents' eating habits, and this accounts for the generational patterns of ADHD. Other studies suggest that, like Down syndrome or muscular dystrophy, ADHD is a genetic disease, and a specific gene, the A1 variant of the D2 dopamine receptor gene, has been identified by scientists as the leading candidate. But if ADHD is a genetic disease or an abnormality, it's a popular one, possibly afflicting as many as 25 million individuals in the United States. Some estimates put ADHD as occurring in 20% of males and 5% of females. Other estimates are much lower, hitting a bottom of 3% of males and 0.5% of females. With such a wide distribution among our population, is it reasonable to assume that ADHD is simply a quirk, that it's some sort of aberration caused by defective genes or child abuse? When the condition is so widely distributed, inevitable questions arise. Why? Where did ADHD come from? The answer is, people with ADHD are the leftover hunters, those whose ancestors evolved and matured thousands of years in the past in hunting societies. There is ample precedent for genetic diseases, in quotes, that in fact represent evolutionary survival strategies. Sickle cell anemia, for example, is now known to make its victims less susceptible to malaria. When living in the jungles of Africa, where malaria is endemic, it was a powerful environmental tool against death by disease. In the malaria-free environment of North America, it became a liability. The same is true of Tay-Sachs disease, a genetic condition that hits mainly Eastern European Jews and confers on them a relative immunity to tuberculosis. And even cystic fibrosis, the deadly genetic disease common among Caucasians, 1 in 25 white Americans carries the gene, may represent a genetic adaptation. Recent research indicates the cystic fibrosis gene helps protect its victims at younger ages from death by such diarrheal diseases as cholera, which periodically swept Europe thousands of years ago. It's not so unusual, apparently, for humans to have built into our genetic material protection against local diseases and other environmental conditions. Certainly, Darwin's theory of natural selection argues in favor of such bodily defenses. Those individuals with immunities would survive to procreate and pass along their genetic material. As the human race moved from its earliest ancestors, two basic types of cultures evolved. In the areas that were lush with plant and animal life and had low human population density, hunters and gatherers predominated. In other parts of the world, particularly Asia, farming or agricultural societies evolved. Be it pursuing buffalo in North America, hunting deer in Europe, chasing wildebeest in Africa, or picking fish from a stream in Asia, these hunters needed a certain set of physical and mental characteristics to be successful. Number one, they constantly monitor their environment. That rustle in the bushes could be a lion or a coiled snake. Failure to be fully aware of the environment and notice that faint sound might mean a swift and painful death. Or that sound or flash of movement might be the animal the hunter was stalking, and noticing it would mean the difference between a full belly and hunger. I've walked through forests and jungles with modern hunter types in the United States, Europe, Australia, and East Africa, and one characteristic always struck me. They notice everything. A flipped-over stone, a tiny footprint, a distant sound, an odd smell in the air, the direction in which flowers point or moss grows. All these things have meaning to hunters, and even when walking quickly, they notice everything. Number two, they can totally throw themselves into the hunt. Time is elastic for them. Another characteristic of a good hunter is the ability to totally focus on the moment, utterly abandoning all consideration of any other time or place. When the hunter sees the prey, he gives chase through gully or ravine, over fields or through trees, giving no thought to the events of the day before, nor not considering the future, simply living totally in that one pure moment and immersing himself in it. When involved in the hunt, time seems to speed. When not in the hunt, time becomes slow. While Hunter's ability to concentrate in general may be low, his ability to utterly throw himself into the hunt at the moment is astonishing. 3, they're flexible, capable of changing strategy on a moment's notice. If the wild boar vanishes into the brush and a rabbit appears, the hunter is off in a new direction. The book ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, we were talking in the last hour about the possibility of a pandemic of this new Wuhan virus, this coronavirus. It's a beta coronavirus, by the way. The common cold is a family called the alpha coronaviruses, and there's thousands or millions of variations of the common cold, which is why we are constantly getting, rhinoviruses, these cold viruses that are a little different all the time. But the beta viruses are much more damaging. That's SARS and MERS. MERS is the one that is transmitted by camels. They're having a problem with it in Saudi Arabia right now. And then, of course, the Wuhan virus. So these are all viruses. All the beta ones are viruses that actually originally lived in animals. In the case of SARS, in the case of Wuhan, apparently bats, and in the case of MERS, camels. And they jumped to humans, which is, as I mentioned the other day, that's what you call a zoonotic disease. So as we're looking at the possibility of a pandemic or an epidemic in the United States, or both, a worldwide pandemic, it's worth getting in the Wayback Machine and going back to May of 2018. In May of 2018, and tip of the hat, by the way, to the person on Twitter who flagged this for me, it was Jamil Smith. Actually, somebody retweeted his tweet. Let me see who that was. It was Herbst Hahn. Thank you, Herbst. Back in May of 2018, Rear Admiral Timothy Ziemer, if I'm pronouncing it right, Ziemer, was the Senior Director for Global Health Security and Biodefense at the National Security Council. He ran the team that was responsible for dealing with a pandemic in the United States. And this was, I believe this was originally put together back, years earlier, almost a decade earlier, in response to SARS. So we had this team inside the National Security Council that was directly responsible for coordinating federal policy and federal state policy with regard to a pandemic or an epidemic, or even, bioterrorism. What happened in May of 2018? In May of 2018, National Security Advisor John Bolton disbanded the team. It does not exist right now. There's nobody in charge of pandemics. The CDC, they can look at the virus and say, oh, here's what it looks like. But they don't run U.S. policy. I mean, this is mind-boggling. In May of 2018, there was an article in The Independent, the British newspaper, that said, the quote, the breakup of his team comes at a time when many experts say the country is already underprepared for the increasing risks of a pandemic or bioterrorism attack. And here we are now, a year and a half later, I mean, this is Ronald Klain, who was the U.S. Ebola response coordinator. Well, maybe this was put together in response to Ebola, not to SARS. But in any case, from late 2014, now this would be, the Obama administration, to early 2015, was chief of staff to both Al Gore and Joe Biden during their vice presidential terms. He says that Zimmer, the guy in charge of this team, was forced out by John Bolton. And you wonder if this will be addressed in John Bolton's book. Anyhow, Elenia in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, what's up? What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am well. What's on your mind?
I've been waiting long to talk to you. It's been more than a year. I've been trying to call you. But the thing is, my question is, when Trump popped in Brazil and did a deal with Bolsonaro, gave him a bunch of dollars because they photographed the dollars, and then they burned the Amazonian down, and there was no help, and now there's a deficiency with the immunizations. He doesn't allow the immunizations to enter there for the people, and they did that when it was Iraq war. They dumped all the sewage from boats in Rio, in Copacabana, where I used to live. They had to build walls of sand and give 10,000 children immunizations.
Wow.
And now Bolsonaro is a fascist and militaristic, abusing all in Brazil.
Right.
He doesn't allow the vaccination.
That's amazing. He also just appointed a new director of, I believe it's their educational system, who is a believer in, what do you call it? Creationism. He's a creationist. He believes that the earth is only 5,000 to 6,000 years old, et cetera, and he wants this point of view presented in the textbooks from elementary school all the way up through college in Brazil now. I mean, this is what happens when you get these anti-science guys. That's dangerous stuff. Elenia, thank you for the heads up on that. We'll pay attention to it. Iris in Southfield, Michigan. Hey, Iris, what's on your mind today?
Hello.
Hey.
There's a movie called Occupied, in which Russia invades Norway, and the head of the Russians say, well, the U.S. is going to sit this one out. And it scared the hell out of me, because Trump is very lucky that Russia did not march into Ukraine while the aid was on hold.
Yeah. Or Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, for that matter, or Poland.
Or Norway.
Yeah, or Norway, yeah.
Right.
So when was that movie made, Iris?
The movie was made a couple of years ago.
Before Trump?
And I believe it's on Netflix.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that, because ever since I got Amazon Prime,
yeah,
I get them mixed up.
Okay. No, it's all good.
It's either on Amazon Prime or Netflix.
Okay, Occupied. I mix them up too.
And it's in Norwegian with subtitles.
Okay, I'll go looking for it. Iris, thank you very much for that. Jonathan in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jonathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. So I think people are asking the wrong question about Biden and whether he was guilty or innocent of corruption. Biden, first of all, Biden's son wasn't even on the board when they were doing the investigations. The investigations were done between 2010 and 2012, and Biden was on the board in 2014.
No, he was put on the board in part because of the investigations. Him and the former president of Poland, and another American whose name escapes me, in order to try to clean the company up. Or
Right,
at least that's the story that I've
read.
read.
The National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, in an article in September, issued a statement saying that they were the only ones doing investigations, and their investigations were over a 2-year period, and they ended 2 years prior to Biden's son getting on the board.
Yeah. No, I got it, Jonathan.
But more importantly, even if they were self-dealing and corrupt, would someone please explain to me how this in some way jeopardizes national security, because it doesn't.
No, and it doesn't justify withholding aid to an ally who is at war and had 15,000 people die in that war.
And I don't know why no one mentions that, because it's the
Republicans repeat that
whether
constantly.
it's there or not is irrelevant.
Yeah, the Republicans repeat that constantly, and I heard several Republican senators say the same thing this morning. Biden is irrelevant, but if the GOP is going to insist on Biden testimony, whether it's Joe or Hunter or both, assuming that everything that you and I just agreed on is just the absolute truth and nothing goes beyond that's the whole thing, then here's a golden opportunity to do like Walsh did to Joe McCarthy and basically say, have you no ethics at all? I mean, have you no concern? Have you no shame, sir, at long last, for doing this and catapult himself to the top of the Democratic pile?
John Dean is all for having Biden testify. I said, sure, let him testify. It's nothing.
Yeah, exactly. My point is it's free publicity, if nothing else. Jonathan, thank you for the call. Michael in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Oh, Tom, thank you for being part of the destruction of ignorance.
You're welcome.
I was watching the impeachment trials going on here, and these guys, they're arguing against each other. One of them gets on and says, well, a subpoena can be issued by Congress. The next one says it needs to go through the court. The next one says it can't be. They're just ridiculous. Then you turn around and you throw the release of this stuff that came out of the White House now from Bolton involving A.G. Barr. I'm just wondering how long it's going to be before A.G. Barr rolls over, if he's got any ethics at all. And you've mentioned before some of the things he's done in the past, so I don't have high hopes.
No, I don't either. He was always a good soldier.
If it would go that far, though, I think he's got a whole lot more information than most anybody.
I agree. And frankly, I think the Attorney General Barr himself should be subject to impeachment hearings. But that's a whole nother rant. But yeah, and they are arguing against themselves. See, they're not really, the Republicans' lawyers are not really trying to change anybody's mind, because they know that there are not 20 Republican senators who are going to vote to kick Trump out of office. So all they're trying to do, they're arguing basically for Fox News and for Trump himself.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
They don't care if their arguments are truthful or honest or even coherent, as long as they sound good on Fox and they make Trump smile. That's all they care about. And welcome back. Gary in Naples, Florida. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hello, Thom Hartmann. Thank you.
Hey, Gary.
I hope after I quickly say why I called, so apropos, you'll let me please quote Robert Kennedy. So I called about the most important thing, and you touched on it. You did touch on it. The most important thing that's going on right now, other than, entrenched greed, FDR confronted it, and it's very simple to me. It's the rule of law.
Yes, that's what's being challenged.
This guy has been trying to destroy, and he's made inroads. Unfortunately, we had a consensus. I'm 74 years old. Tell me if I'm mistaken. We had a consensus, America, whether you're Republican, Democrat, whatever. We had a consensus that the rule of law was that important. And the loss of that principle will do us in. And that's what's going on in America. We can't let them get away with it. This is what's at stake. And we better wake up.
I agree. And Trump has been at war with the rule of law literally since he began in his father's business.
I want to close.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I know there's other callers, and I do want to close from this quote from Robert Kennedy. I added a few words, but this is basically it. Robert Kennedy, who most of us really loved and remember, he said this: the Republicans, they measure and brag, and I use that word, and use the GNP and the stock market, I use that word, for everything except that which makes life worthwhile. Period. Right. Robert
Kennedy.
Yep, I agree. I've got the clip of that floating around here someplace. I should play it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
all right,
Thank you very
thank
much,
you.
Gary. Good to hear from you. Kathy in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Kathy, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
About impeachment, and by the way, I'm a citizen journalist here in Tacoma, volunteer, disabled senior, and, we're in the crucible here. And but impeachment, I talk with people about it, and they talk about law, and I heard the previous caller. I love listening to the callers to understand what people are thinking. And this is a power struggle. This is a raw, balls out, if I can say that, power struggle.
Yep.
And it is really important that we get that. And this word fascism, we need to get used to it. He hits all 14 of the classic European characteristics.
I agree.
On the head.
I agree.
Yeah,
I absolutely agree.
Yes.
And I think your characterization is the one that is probably missing from most of the analysis that we hear in the electronic media, that this actually is a power struggle. This is a struggle between a man in the White House who is a criminal and wants to be an autocrat, and the rule of law in America and the Constitution. And it looks like he's going to win.
Exactly. And, what the experts in, this dictatorship autocracy thing, fascism, frankly, is they say don't rely on our institutions, because it is absolutely true. And I do the news 12 hours a day and very obsessively. It's not healthy. And I blog, on my Facebook about it. And we can't vote or pray this away. He has to go now.
Yeah.
And if we don't get rid of him now, I'm really afraid that voting him out is not going to happen, because his, the power, the control of Facebook and all those things are happening on steroids now with no controls.
Yep, and he's going to lie his way into office. I'm with you, Kathy. I cannot disagree at all. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Tom in Newport, Oregon. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to comment on what's going on in China about the virus over there, and I just wanted to reflect to you, if you ever seen the movie, I think Brad Pitt was in it. It was called Containment or something like that.
I've seen a couple of these, kind of apocalyptic,
right,
virus goes nuts movies. I don't remember
something like what's going on right now. I don't mean to interrupt you, but it was about a bat feces mixing with a pig.
Right. Sean says the movie's called Contagion.
Contagion, yes.
With Matt Damon.
Yeah, Matt Damon, yes. I knew it was one of those guys. But that was a frightening movie, man. That was. I think everybody should see that movie and give them a good idea what could really happen.
Yep.
So,
well, get ready. I mean, we're on the edge of this right now. Thank you, Tom. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
This is really kind of a start of the show, saying maybe we can pick up here tomorrow, but it's time to start asking the question in a probative, investigatory way. What was it that Donald Trump knew or was convinced of in the middle of 2016 that had him in a state of mind where he could confidently say, if I'm not the winner in November, it's rigged? What did he know? What had he bought and paid for or agreed to or bargained that had him in that state of mind? Because
I just assumed it was bluster, Eric.
Well, yeah, given the, crass savage that he is, it could be just that. But surely he had advisors telling him maybe after the first time those words.
Actually, I don't think so, Eric, because one of the things that we know is, A, Trump didn't expect to win, and in fact, he already had plans in place to do, and had, as was way down the road on these plans, to do two things. Number one, he was going to build $1 billion Trump Tower in Moscow. And number two, he was going to start a television network. to compete with Fox News that was even to the right of Fox News. It's going to be the Trump network. And, you know, it was like One America News, you know, the one that went over to Ukraine and did the whole documentary about Joe Biden's an evil man. That network exists only on the internet. But, you know, I've seen it on United Airlines. I mean, you know, they play it on. In fact, one time I got on the plane and every single, as you get on the plane, they pay for this. Every single TV screen on the entire airplane was showing this right-wing TV network. You know, that it was bizarre. But, you know, it's on DirecTV, I guess, or on one of the satellites, Direct or Dish. But, you know, he had not written, and Eric, thanks for the call, he had not written an acceptance speech. So, I mean, if you're expecting to win, you write an acceptance speech. And that causes me to think that he, frankly, was not expecting to win. Daniel in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Daniel, what's up?
Yeah. Hey, Tom, how about what's going to happen in China with the
Daniel, I'm sorry. Your phone is all badly distorted. I'm gonna. Oh, can you fix it by moving where your mouth is or something?
Can you hear me now?
Okay, yes, I can.
Yeah. What's going to happen in China with
no, there it goes again. I'm sorry. You can talk to Lise. Lise's on line too. Andrew in Seattle. Hey, Andrew, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann. I just wanted to say one of your callers mentioned something about how Trump is the fascist, or it's kind of like leaning fascist. When you say that America has been leaning fascist for maybe like 50 years or more, and that after Citizens United, that pretty much put the last nail in the coffin?
I would argue that it was not Citizens United. It was actually the Buckley decision in 1976 when the Supreme Court wiped out all the bribery laws and political corruption laws, even ones that had just been passed the year before in the wake of the Nixon bribery scandals, and said that if a billionaire wants to own a politician, that is simply First Amendment protected free speech. And then 2 years later in the Bellotti decision, the Supreme Court said the same thing about corporations. That was the genesis of it. Supreme Court simply amplified those decisions in
just handed it over.
Excuse me.
So it's pretty much when corporate power, media, and the government are all working together. So that's pretty much what we've had for quite some time.
Yeah, and that's a reasonable definition of fascism. Yep. Yeah, we're here. Yeah, Andrew, thank you for the call. Tom in Madison, Wisconsin. Tom, what's up?
Yeah, hi. During the George W. Bush administration, they game played what a pandemic would do in this country using top government and business leaders. This exercise was supposed to last for 3 days, but they called it off after the first day because everything fell apart. The country went into chaos. Now, maybe you could check that out. Yeah. I believe Tom Ridge was the orchestrator.
Right.
But, yeah, after the first day, they called it off because there was nothing left.
Wow. Well, we have no national security health infrastructure. We have no national health care infrastructure, that can be centrally controlled in any way or directed or guided. And, so anything that we do with regard to...
And I'm sure that was part of the problem, but there was still chaos, breakdown in food deliveries, power failure, everything.
Well, and that's what they're going to start seeing in Wuhan. You've got now 56 million people in this quarantine, and they're going to start getting hungry. I mean, it's going to get bad. It's going to get real bad. And I don't think it's going to work. This virus may end up becoming part of the new normal, and we'll see. But anyhow, we'll continue the conversation tomorrow. And I wouldn't freak out about it. There's still a long way to go before it's anything like that, but there is a serious problem in China. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, so get out there, get active, tag you're it, and tell your friends where they can find progressive media. Please. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.